Growth doesn't always feel like expansion. Sometimes growth feels like grief. You start to shift, not dramatically or defiantly, just subtly. You pause instead of pleasing. You speak up instead of shrinking. You let the silence sit instead of rushing in to fix it. And you start saying no, not out of coldness, but out of care. Care for your time, care for your peace. And yet, every no feels kind of like a betrayal. Not because you've done anything wrong, but more so because somewhere along the way, your worth got fused with how much you gave. And your identity got wrapped up being who others needed you to be. And your closeness really depended on compliance. And now that you're growing, now that you're healing, now that you're actually letting go of that role, this is when the guilt shows up. And it whispers things like, who do you think you are to stop showing up? They count on you. Or you're abandoning them? You're becoming cold. Even if none of this is true, because when you've spent like years managing someone else's like comfort, well, prioritizing your own integrity can feel like cruelty. And this is the pain that brought me to the work that I do here at Bintegers. See, there's an unspoken truth that becoming more whole often makes you harder to hold, at least at first. Because integrity isn't just about honesty, it's also about alignment. It's about letting your insides match your outsides, even when that means saying things that people don't necessarily want to hear. And intimacy, that's not about being liked, it's more about being known. It's about saying, this is who I am in this moment right now, and letting that be enough, even when the room goes silent. See, at Uber Ventures, I don't want to teach people to perform to get connection. I want to learn together with you how to stop abandoning ourselves in order to preserve roles that we never really consented to in the first place. So this episode is part of that learning. Because what no one really is talking about, especially when it comes to healing, is how lonely it can actually feel to be in this growth phase. Especially when your growth makes others feel uncomfortable. Especially when people miss the version of you that never needed boundaries. The version that made things seem easy. The version that said yes without hesitation and stayed soft, even when it hurt. See, they might not say it outright, but you can feel it, right? You can feel it in the shift of tone, in the long pause after your no, in the way that their warmth seems cool just a little bit. And so that guilt starts to creep in. Not because you're cruel, but more so because their approval used to be your map. And now you're walking without that assistance. See, guilt is really clever. It doesn't always sound like an accusation. Oftentimes it'll sound like nostalgia. You used to be so thoughtful, it will say, right? Or you were always the one that everyone could count on. Or you never used to be this distant. See, they're not insults, they're longings. But they're not necessarily about you. They're more so about the role that you once played. The one that made them feel safe. The one that kept everything running. The one that never asked for anything in return. And now that you've stepped outside of that role, they don't really know how to meet you anymore, right? So they ask you to shrink again. Not maliciously, but familiarly, because your growth disrupts the system. And systems crave predictability, even when it comes at your expense. So you want to say, I'm still me, I'm just more honest now. I still care, I just don't want to disappear to prove that I care anymore. Or I'm not abandoning you, I'm finally choosing me as well. But these explanations never seem to land, because if someone only felt close to you through your compliance, then your honesty will feel like distance. And it's not because you're unkind, but more so because the version of you that they loved was shaped by your self-abandonment. And that's the heartbreak of healing. See, you realize that some of your relationships weren't really rooted in you. They were more so rooted in the role that you played. And when you outgrow that role, you, in essence, may risk that connection. You say no, and the conversation changes. You set a boundary, and their warmth begins to fade. You stop overgiving, and suddenly you're different. And I mean, you are, but not in the way that they think. See, you're not becoming worse. You're actually becoming whole. You're in the process of coming back to yourself. But wholeness isn't always it's not always easy to recognize, is it? Especially when someone preferred the version of you that stayed small and suppressed. So you might start to second guess your growth. Maybe you'll say something like, have I gone too far? Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe this boundary is too much in the way that I'm applying it. Because every time that you stand tall, you hear echoes of the role trying to call you back. The role that taught you to smooth things over, right? The role that taught you to fix instead of to feel. The role that got you love, or at least something that looked like love. And it hurts to walk away from that role, doesn't it? Even when that role was hurting you. But here's what no one teaches us along the way. You can love people deeply and still need to disappoint their expectations. You can care and still say no. You can grieve what the old role gave you without going back to it. Because the guilt isn't proof that you're wrong. It's just proof that you're in this process of healing. It's the ache of transition, the sting of stretching, the tremble that comes with finally choosing yourself in relationships where that was never modeled before. See, there's a moment in the healing when you realize that you're not afraid of being alone, and more so you're just afraid of being misunderstood by the people you've loved the longest. Because you know that they'll say, you've changed, right? And you have, yes. You're not who you were. And that's not a crisis. But for those who only knew the earlier version of you, the version who contorted to meet that moment, it's for these folks that your growth feels more like distance, and your boundaries may feel more like rejection, and your clarity will feel like a sense of coldness. And so they grieve the role, even while you're now just trying to meet yourself fully for the first time. And this dissonance can break your heart. Because on some level, you hope that they'd be proud. You hope that they would see the version of you that finally breathes deeper. The version that no longer folds under obligation. This version of you that says no with a clear voice and not a trembling one. But instead, of being celebrated, you get confusion and resistance and disappointment. And the guilt creeps in again, not because you've done wrong per se, but more so because you're wired to keep the peace. And now the peace costs too much. And here's really what's revolutionary in this transition. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that you've outgrown. Not even if they love that version. And for that matter, not even if you'd love that version. Because roles are not identity. Roles are survival scripts. And survival is not meant to be permanent. See, you're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to return to the parts of yourself that were buried underneath all that responsibility. You're allowed to become unfamiliar to those who only knew the mask that you wore. And yes, it will be painful, but it'll also be quite clarifying. Because the ones who love you now, like the real you, they won't ask for the performance. They'll rather sit with you in those pauses. They'll listen through your messiness. They'll stay when you stop giving everything away. But until then, you may still feel alone in your clarity. And that's not proof that you're off course. It's actually proof that you're not shrinking anymore. Because guilt is often the echo of growth. And the pain that comes from shedding what no longer fits, this is part of this transition. And sometimes we have to disappoint the room, right? To come home to ourselves. There'll be moments when you'd want to go back. And that's not because it was better once upon a time, but more so because it was easier to be approved of then than to be unknown now. So you'll most likely hear the old voices saying, just say yes, just smooth it over, just make them comfortable. And in those moments, you'll pause. And in that pause, you'll remember. You'll remember that you're not betraying them. You're just returning back to you. You're not colder, you're clearer. You're not abandoning anyone. You're just choosing not to abandon yourself again. And that is a rebellion worth being a part of. See, wholeness doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes wholeness comes with silence. Sometimes wholeness comes with distance. And sometimes it also comes with grief that can be so quiet that you can almost barely name it. But just because you feel the guilt, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. See, guilt isn't always a moral signal. Sometimes guilt is just a leftover residue from a life that you've built on self-abandoning. And when you start to leave that life, when you begin to rebuild something that is honest, something that's grounded, something that's aligned, the guilt rises, not as a warning, but as a memory, as a ghost of who you used to be. And it will want you to change that script again. But you're not that version anymore. See, you've outgrown the role that never lets you rest. You've stopped performing peace that cost you your well-being. And you've learned that love without honesty isn't safety. It's more so a performance. And as we said before, we're done with pretending. Even if people around us don't understand, even if they call that selfish, even if they mourn the version of us that used to bend to fit their needs. Because now we know something more sacred. And that is, we're not responsible for managing everyone else's comfort at the cost of our own aliveness. See, we are allowed to say no. We're allowed to change our mind. We're allowed to walk away from the dynamics that only worked when we stayed small and suppressed and stifled. Now, this does not mean that we stop caring. It means instead that we stop confusing care with self-erasing. It means that we stop translating our truth so that it won't make other people flinch. It means more so that we stop mistaking relational obedience for relational intimacy. Because real intimacy, it includes friction and tension and truth. And real love makes room for evolution. So when the guilt comes, and it will come, let it speak. And then let it pass. Because that guilt does not belong to the you that you're becoming. It belongs to the you who never had the permission to say no. The you who thought that approval was the same as acceptance. To the you who thought that being needed was the only way to be loved. And you're not betraying anyone. Now you are returning. You're returning to your ability to breathe. You're returning to your values. You're returning to your voice. You don't have to burn bridges. You just have to stop carrying the whole structure. You don't have to be unkind. You just have to stop mistaking silence for loyalty. And listen, you don't have to fight. Just have to be willing to be misunderstood on your way to being fully known. Because the people who are meant to meet you don't need you to keep playing a part to stay close. These are the ones who will sit with you in your truth, even when it changes the dynamic. See, they'll learn your new language, even when it challenges the old scripts. And they'll love the version of you that finally breathes freely. Because they weren't in love with the performance, were they? They were just waiting for this. They were waiting for the real you. And now you are as well. I hope you come to experience this level of transformation. I'd love to hear your comments, questions down in the comment section below. See you in the next episode.